With you guys today, if I can, and I don't know if I can. Okay. So, no, I do, but the problem is I also have to work.
We'll take a minute.
Yeah.
Reading. Carry on.
Well, we'll probably do this for a little bit, and then we'll probably do that. Okay, because I don't think I'll be able to go on too long. I think we left off yesterday with kind of, I played you Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture.
Yeah.
And just so we kind of went through that, I hope you saw the arc that went through yesterday, the 1812 Overture. Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, of course, is a Russian composer, and he was kind of composing, the 1812 Overture is supposed to be about Napoleon's invasion of Russia. And you saw in that clip that I played there yesterday, they had the French national anthem, the Marseillaise, and then they had that long descending piece in it. And then what was the piece that came in at the end of that? The Russian folk dance, the Cossack folk dance, the Liberty Bells chiming. And this was supposed to, that piece of music really is about the Russian victory. And of course, what was largely responsible for the Russian victory? The winter. Yeah, you're right, Mr. Hatch.
Is
The
that what you
winter.
listened to yesterday?
Yeah, that was the piece that we listened to by Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. I will say, I'm an old guy, I know, and when I was a kid, the Cold War was still going on. And that, you know, was kind of the conflict between the Soviet Union, Russia, and the United States. And when I was a kid, at a lot of 4th of July concerts, they would play the 1812 Overture. And yeah, because it's really great if you're at an outdoor concert, you know, like they used to do like kind of a St. Louis Symphony stuff. If you go up to Forest Park on 4th of July, they do a free concert years ago and all that kind of stuff before you had to worry about carjackings up there. And it was great. And they would literally have like artillery that would shoot out and stuff like that. And I was always like, that's cool, but why on the 4th of July are they playing a Russian composer? They're our enemy. I didn't quite put all the connections to these, but if you look at a lot of music, there is a lot of tie to this. Have you ever heard of a composer by the name of Beethoven? Once or twice? Ludwig van. Beethoven was really in favor. Beethoven was really in favor of Napoleon when he initially invaded his homeland. And then once he actually composed a symphony in his honor, because he thought Napoleon is bringing constitutionalism, he's bringing one man, one vote, republicanism, all of these things. And when he invaded, he realized that Napoleon used those terms, but in reality, what was Napoleon all about? Napoleon. And so he ripped off the title page, the symphony that was dedicated to Napoleon, and changed it to An Unknown Hero, and that became his Heroica Symphony, or which translates into An Unknown Hero, who really doesn't exist. But so, I mean, there's a lot of classical music that's an art that's influenced by Napoleon and what he did. I got to tell you what's going to happen to Napoleon. After this, he goes back, he loses, and ultimately the tide turns, and he's going to be captured by the Grand Alliance. And that is the Brits, the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Russians capture him. And they're going to imprison him on a little tiny island called Elba. And Elba is just, they thought this was really funny. It's a little island for a little emperor. And they're going to put him, Elba is right here. That's Elba. It's a little tiny place, and they're like, we don't have to put that many guards on it. He's going to be fine. We're not going to put many, you know, he can march around, he can do his thing, and we're just going to kind of make fun of him. Well, he always claimed, and he was put on Elba in 1814, and he told France, I will be there when the violets, wild violets, bloom in the spring. So what he ends up, and while he's been taken away, the leaders of the Grand Alliance are going to meet in Vienna, Austria, and they hold this little thing called the Congress of Vienna. And basically, they want to undo Napoleon, and they want to forget about the French Revolution. Now, Cody, if you were the king of Great Britain, or the Tsar of Russia, or the Emperor of Austria, why would you want to forget about the French Revolution?
Well, then there'd be another monarch in France.
There'd be another monarch, and the French Revolution was about getting rid of monarchs. So they want to pretend that this never happened. So what they do is they restore the Bourbon dynasty. And you remember the Bourbon dynasty? They came to power basically in the late 16th century with Henry of Navarre, and they continued through Louis XVI until he was guillotined. So they put Louis's brother on the throne, who takes his regnal name or ruling name to honor his deceased decapitated brother, and he becomes Louis XVIII. Now, you may be saying, Reeves, why wasn't he Louis XVII? Because the king who lost his head was Louis XVI. Well, guess who also died? Louis and Marie Antoinette's son. So to kind of say, well, props to my nephew who would have been the next king, we're going to skip 17 and go to 18. So they put Louis XVIII on the throne. And the Grand Alliance is wanting to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. They're wanting to pretend that nationalism isn't a thing, that republicanism isn't a thing. And Napoleon's off on his little island. Congress of Vienna is doing this, and I said Napoleon promises to return by the time the violets bloom in the spring. But what's going to happen next is the stuff that movies are made of. I mean, it's just truly remarkable that this happens. In fact, I'm surprised that Hollywood, Steven Spielberg or somebody hasn't made a movie of this, because they really should. A Hollywood scriptwriter couldn't do any better. What Napoleon does is get some of his BFFs together. They basically sneak out, basically on small boats. And they basically leave from right here, and they row up here, basically to the French Riviera. And what Napoleon does is he lands, and he's still got his, because they let him keep his little emperor costume because they thought it was fine. He's the emperor of the little island, little emperor. So he lands, gets off the small boats with his small band of followers, and he lands on the French Riviera, and he starts marching toward Paris. So he goes, it's like the Pied Piper story. He lands there, and people are like, that's Napoleon. That's Napoleon. And so they just like put down whatever they're doing, and they start following him. And he just keeps marching toward Paris. And he keeps marching and marching and marching. Of course, this is spring. He keeps marching and moves up and closer, and villages all through southern France and small towns, people just put down their stuff and they follow him. They're like, Napoleon said he would return, and Napoleon has returned. He's back. He said he would lead France to victory, and he's here. So finally, he gets about 60, 70 miles out south of Paris. And Louis XVIII is starting to soil himself. And he's like, we can't let him get here, because if he gets here, this is going to be a huge problem for us. I mean, he's a rock star, okay? Napoleon's a rock star. Louis, if we're comparing charisma, Napoleon would be like, who's the most charismatic musician, popular musician out there today? Not Justin Bieber.
Jojo Siwa.
Oh my God.
That's where I draw the line.
Adam Levine.
Adam Levine.
He's cool.
He got
Okay.
old. He got
No.
He's not
Yeah,
that
but he's
charismatic.
cool. He's nice.
Is California
Luke
written
Bryan.
across the stomach? What else could you ask me?
Well, there you
I'd
go.
say Cardinals. The Jonas Brothers. I said.
Oh, the Jonas Brothers.
Jojo. Or my
Well,
Jonas
okay, maybe
Brothers.
this is a terrible example, but someone who's got a lot of charisma.
Jonas Brothers.
Okay.
Oprah.
And on the other hand, You've got someone who's got virtually, is like a 7th grade band musician. So let's say let's go back to the 60s. You got Jimi Hendrix, okay, charisma.
Solid choice.
On the other hand, you've got a middle school band student. That's what Louis XVIII would be. Who's gonna rock out the stadium?
I mean.
Jimi Hendrix. Okay, so that's what's gonna happen. So, what happens then, ladies and gentlemen, is Napoleon Bonaparte gets 60 miles out. Louis XVIII, the Bourbon Restoration King, sends out the French army. Napoleon does something that is just phenomenal. And it is the ultimate power move. He hides.
He does?
No.
Oh, I was gonna say what?
He marches out, okay? He marches out, he's got his uniform on. He marches out to the army, has all the people who followed him stand back, marches out to them and says, and opens up his shirt, his military jacket, opens it up and says, I am your emperor. I would do it with a French accent, but I have no voice. I am your emperor. If you're going to follow me, get behind me now. If not, shoot me now in my heart. And what happens is the entire French army marches right behind him.
It was like, what?
And I mean, it was the ultimate power move. I mean, he just threw it all down there and said, follow me. And what did they do? They all followed him. Of course, what did Louis XVIII do?
Are you kidding me?
He ran away.
Aw.
Because there were still 60 miles, so he was like, I'm hitting the road. Okay? And Napoleon marches triumphantly back into Paris. And I mean, he is happy as a lark. He's like, I'm back, baby, I'm in charge, this is great. But he's got one problem. Can you guess what that one problem is?
Is he sick?
Nope.
He's still short.
Well, there is that.
With that.
Any other problem?
People are like, wait, what did we just do?
Mhm.
Yes, that's what they did.
Well, there's one other problem too, is Britain doesn't like him. Russia doesn't like him. Prussia doesn't like him. Austria doesn't like him.
Oh, yeah.
Spain doesn't like him. Italy doesn't like him. And they still have armies.
And there's
So what he does, and this is a 100-day period, so for basically 3 months, he's back. And this is kind of like Return of Napoleon. He's got 3 days, or 3 months rather. He tries to reach out to Britain and the other Grand Alliance powers and saying, guys, you know this whole thing about me invading your countries and trying to conquer Europe? I am so over that. That was so 1814. This is 1815. I will never do that again. I just want to be in Paris. I want to drink some fine French Chardonnay. I want to eat some baguettes. I do not want to invade Vienna again. I do not want Russia. It is way too cold. I do not want Spain. I hate paella. I want to stay here in France. And Britain, I will never try to invade your country again either. Okay, so what do you think they all say?
Yeah,
We
right.
don't believe you. No.
We don't believe you. You're a liar, liar, pants on fire. So they start trying to mobilize. And they're going to fight a war with him. They're going to try to capture him again. So what does he do? Well, he's going to march. And his final battle is called Waterloo. And it's on the Belgium-French border. Now, a lot of times, what you hear about, excuse me, let's try this again. Have you ever heard about Waterloo before, a reference to Waterloo? Yeah. Sometimes what?
It's a high school.
Oh, it is. There is a town, Waterloo, Illinois. And sometimes you will hear, like in culture or literature, references to "this is my Waterloo," which basically means like this is my last stand. Sometimes it can also mean like, this is my last gasp. And that's really what this is. Waterloo is going to be the last gasp, the last stand for him. Because he decides, I'm going to have to mobilize what few troops I have and move as quick as I possibly can. Because if I don't, the other countries are going to come and hammer us. And they're going to get us. So what he does is he marches on June 18th, 1815. And he's getting ready to go, and he arrives there first. But what's going to happen at Waterloo for him is he gets there, but there are two other sides that are going to be there at Waterloo. Austria is going to be there, and so is Britain. But the weather is unfortunately for Napoleon, he's not going to be good. It's going to rain torrentially when he first gets there. Now, if you remember, what was Napoleon's primary game? What was the military technology that he adapted and was so proficient at? Cannons, heavy artillery. What's the problem with a heavy soaking rain and cannons and artillery? Yeah, you can't move them. They're heavy, and when the ground's smushy, what's going to happen to the heavy stuff? It's going to sink and bog down. So he couldn't move his cannons where he wanted to. The other thing that he wasn't aware of is that he knew one army was there, but he didn't know the other army was there. So he's going to strike a position. Now, the Duke of Wellington, who is the British commander there, is going to say, let's hide the Austrian forces on this other side of the hill. He thought that Napoleon would gamble and just might want to attack immediately, because if he knew that the French army would just be taking on the British army, it's a one-to-one thing. But he kept the Austrian army on the other side of the hill, so he couldn't really see it too well. Because remember, there's no drones to fly up to see this kind of stuff then. So Napoleon and his old guard, his elite troops, march out first, and they're going to charge immediately. And as soon as they're off their line, exposed, what does the Austrian forces do? What do the Austrian forces do? They come out this way, they move up on the hill and start firing. And what happens to the French forces? They're cut down. And eventually Napoleon surrenders. And so his glorious 100 days end at Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington's strategy is ultimately what defeats Napoleon. And the Duke of Wellington becomes like the rock star of Europe in that era, because who did he defeat for the last time? Napoleon. And Napoleon was just like the military man. It was like, man, you beat Napoleon. You are awesome. And so his career was like set for the rest of his life. It was pretty awesome for him, certainly. Okay, so the old guard, his soldiers wanted to fight to the end, and Napoleon said, no, we're going to surrender. I don't want you all to die on account of me. And it's the end of Napoleon. And he is then exiled to St. Helena. You might say, well, where the heck is St. Helena? Well, St. Helena is going to be right here. Elba was right there. St. Helena's right there. Why do you think the Grand Alliance moved everything, moved him from there to there?
He's further away. Can't really
He's,
go away.
he's further away he's off the coast of, it's kind of almost halfway between South America and Africa, closer to Africa though. How are you going to row your rowboat to France? You're not. Or if you are, you're going to be doing it for a heck of a long time. Okay? So he's there, and he actually stays there until his death 6 years later in 1821. And so he's exiled, first time in Elba, second time after the 100 days in 1815 to St. Helena, where he ultimately dies in 1821. Now, what's the legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte? Well, Napoleon Bonaparte's legacy is that his significance in history is really monumental. Okay? First of all, Napoleon is going to introduce to an entire continent the following concepts. Nationalism. Now, nationalism, as you know, started in, the 30 Years' War, but Napoleon is going to spread this everywhere. And nationalism is going to be the predominant ideology that you see in Europe forevermore. Okay? So that's big. Secondly, and I can't tell you how significant that is, that he spreads nationalism. Because after he invades almost all of Europe in this, what countries that had never been unified nation states become unified nation states within the next 50, 60 years? Germany, Italy, okay, for example. Austria, the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had been around for over half a millennium, is going to ultimately end with World War I. Okay? So the nation states that you know of in Europe really are kick-started by Napoleon and his idea of nationalism. Idea number two, Napoleon and the French Revolution are going to be the beginning of the end of monarchs throughout Europe. How many kings still rule? I mean, really rule? In Great Britain, yeah, you've got Queen Elizabeth, but does she really rule? Parliament does, okay, with the Prime Minister. Is there a king in France? Is there a king in Russia? Or Tsar? Is there a king in Austria? No, I mean, or Spain. Well, actually, there is a king in Spain, but he doesn't really do anything. My point is, this is the beginning of the end for kings. Thirdly, it's also the beginning of the end for nobility. Who really has nobles anymore? I mean, in Britain, yeah, maybe you have some titles here and there, but France has nobility and no nobility. Italy doesn't have nobility. Most of the countries in Europe don't have nobility anymore. Fourth, Napoleon's invasion spreads the ideas of the Enlightenment everywhere. Now, you could make the argument that he's really more of a Romantic era figure, but he claims the ideas of the Enlightenment. One man, one vote, everyone's equal before the law, those kinds of things with the civil code of Napoleon. And he's going to spread those Enlightenment ideals everywhere that he conquers. And he actually has an army in about every place. So that's pretty significant. Fifth thing that Napoleon does that's important. Napoleon is going to champion public education. Now, we talked about why he championed public education. In part because he wanted peace with the church, and in part because he wanted propaganda to control folks. But another reason for public education is if you're going to have a republic, what do you need to have? People who can read, right? People who are educated, yes. So this is going to be a big idea. Education is now going to be one of the primary vehicles that we see in Europe. And there's going to be a demand for public education. And public education is going to lead towards something else that is started with Napoleon. Okay? And that is going to be the end of feudalism and the beginning of a healthy and large middle class. Because as much as, you may hate being in school, and we all, feel that way at times, education really, the reason that you're still here doing what you're doing is that ultimately you want a good economic background. You want to go on and do things and achieve, and really, I think most of us see education, whether that's in whatever field you go into, is the key to economic success. And Napoleon's the guy who's going to basically spread public education, and that is going to help end feudalism, and that is going to help increase class mobility. This is pretty significant. Another significance of Napoleon. Now, he was not as anti-religious as, of course, they were during the Reign of Terror. But is he really pro-religion? Not really. the Napoleonic Wars are also going to be one of the things that start spreading secularism throughout all of Europe. We all know what secularism is, okay? It's this notion that, you know, you have non-religious explanations in culture. I'll give you a case in point. In the 2010 census in Great Britain, what religion was in the top 5? The British census.
Atheism, Christianity, Hebrew, Hinduism, Protestantism.
Being a Jedi.
What?
Being a Jedi.
I'm confused. I'll join.
You know, what are Jedis? Star Wars. What does that tell you about people filling out religious census questions in Britain? Are they taking religion seriously?
No.
And Jedi was actually something they would have to write in. It wasn't like an option.
It must have been a bet, like someone must have been like,
You know?
all right, our whole college has to go in and vote that we're Jedi.
We're Jedis. Well, and my point is this kind of shows that, you know, people don't take their religion as seriously as they would have, say, during the medieval period or the Reformation. And so, you know, all of these things, this is a mighty, mighty change that Napoleon breaks. You see this right here. Do any of you know what this is? It's his mausoleum. A later French ruler brings him back from St. Helena, builds basically a huge building with a canopy that you can walk around on this top area, and that's in the very center of him is his mausoleum. It's kind of like a big stone sarcophagus or coffin that holds his remains. Yep, he's in there.
Where's that at?
That's in Paris. They dug him up from St. Helena and brought him back. And I mean, it's like a big national kind of thing. And you might say, well, that's kind of creepy that they do that. But some of you went with me. Was it last year? We went to Springfield. And we went to the Lincoln
To Lincoln.
tomb. And what did they do with Lincoln?
Did practically the same thing.
Same thing. There's a big obelisk and you go through and you're like, oh, Abe's inside there.
Well, they dug him up multiple times, didn't they? Isn't he encased in concrete now?
Yeah. Well, they tried to hold him hostage. Lincoln.
Like, what do you
And I mean, what are you gonna do with him? Like, what are you gonna do? Kill him?
check in the tree that burns
Yeah,
out?
did you not remember that?
Yeah.
Someone tried to steal Michael Jackson's body.
Someone did?
Yeah, like when he died, like right after he died.
Well, that's
I
fine.
need to.
Okay, I'm gonna stop there today. I've got a little quick video we're gonna take a look at on the French Revolution crash course, so you can just put all this together. And then I got one thing I want to talk to you about.